I think it's going to get murdery today, you guys. Yeah, I've got that feeling. I asked if people were ready for murder, and it sounds like you are. We've got Jennifer, she's up there from Minneapolis, Mavens and fellow peculiars. We've got several people saying hi. Susan, Anna, Santa Barbara, checking in. Lots of always ready for murder, says Jennifer. Let's see here. Jennifer added these, but Teresa is like, did someone say murder? Davey, did someone say murder?
Hey, peculiars. How's it going? Oh, yes, we are in for a murder. We're in for a treat. And we got, so many themes that have carried over from the first few books we read. We're mentioning grave robbers and Joseph Lister. And I feel like those first few books we read were like Peculiar Book Club 101.
Yes.
And now everybody's ready for all these crazy tales that happen in this time period.
Well, and I think too, at this point, you guys are going to be practically experts on all the forensic murdery details that we're going into. But and I think I'm an old hat at this, but even as an old hat, there were some very surprising things in this particular murder. Don't you think so, Davey?
Yes, this trying to figure out motivations, trying to figure out how he kept getting away with things. There were a lot of. I hope you guys have questions because I've got questions.
I've got questions. And you know who might have some answers? Are you guys ready? By the way, we've been doing a terrible job pronouncing his name. It's Jobb. Are we ready to welcome Dean Jobb? And there he is. Welcome.
Hi.
Dean.
Well,
there's so many questions going on here today. And, I hope that you're ready to talk a lot of gruesome, grisly details because we're your audience. We're your audience for this. Absolutely.
Well, this one thing that intrigued me about Cream is that it is so typically a gruesome and macabre and shadowy Victorian tale. You've got the top hat on that Cream would favor, and I can't think of anyone. He even looks like a villain.
Yeah. Well, I was saying earlier that one of the things that I think is problematic is often we romanticize villains, but you read this book and you're like, nah, he bad whole time. No confusion on that at all. So I do have to say, Kat, who is our drinks maven, created something really special for the case of Dr. Cream. And Finger Guns and Lady Paws, my Lady Paws helper is right. Oh, thank you so much. Yes, from the paws of Lady Paws, our beautiful, mine's a little bit melty, but our beautiful drink, which is I believe we went with creme de la crime. Is that right? We have several names that it was hosted in our newsletter. So if Kat wants to hop on in a minute and tell us about it, but this is a very decadent dessert-like drink and very creamy and probably sinful and enough sugar that it might be against the law. So I feel like we're firing on all cylinders. Cheers to all of you. Who are you drinking a cocktail tonight at all?
A responsible cocktail.
A responsible, yes, always wise. I'm going to be responsible and take like my dairy pill.
I just hope Dr. Cream didn't add anything to that when you weren't looking.
Yeah, it does have the white stuff. I love the white stuff in it. One of the things that is already coming up, this is so funny because we've been on for like all of 4 minutes and everybody's like, motive is an issue. Why is there motive? So we are definitely going to hop into that. But I thought since Davey's queued it up, we have I did a little video promo for it and it's got some great hand porn. Frankly, I think I did some nice hand work in there. So Davey, do you want to give us a little bit of a preview of the book, The Case of the Murderous Dr. Cream?
It was a chilly night in London when Ellen Donworth collapsed near Waterloo Station. She was carried home, suffering violent convulsions and spasms. She said a tall, dark, cross-eyed man gave her something to drink, some white stuff. Sherlock Holmes helpfully said that when a doctor goes wrong, he is the first of criminals because he has the nerve and the knowledge to do great damage. This is the story of Dr. Cream, who really loved to to murder. In fact, he was arrested, put in prison, and when released, took up the practice again with his favorite accompaniment, strychnine. If you'd like to hear more about the case of the murderous Dr. Cream and the hunt for a serial killer, join us at Peculiar Book Club and hear from Dean Jobb about just what kind of person, with his top hat, his cross eyes, and his penchant for the better things in life, decided that the best way to spend his time was by serial killing women. Hope you'll be there.
Oh, we definitely got to give a hand for those hands. Hand for the hand.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Yes.
Thank you. I worked very hard at that. And I know not everybody's read the book, but everyone is excited. So we do have a bunch of people who've read the book and people who haven't. Spoilers, there's murder. But we can just start by motive. This has come up a lot. How in the world do you come to grips with something that just seems so motiveless? It just seems as though he just turned up in life and went, you know what I really need to do? Let's kill some people.
Well, that's one of the intriguing things about this story is the time, is the fact that you can see that the police, the press, the public really can't come to grips with this idea that here's somebody seems to be killing just for the sake of killing. As one of the papers said, I mean, it's almost motiveless.
Yeah.
And so that was really intriguing to see. And there's certainly a motive suggested by his choice of victims, as you noted. 9 out of his 10 known victims were women. Mm-hmm. And they fell into 2 groups. One were women who had become pregnant and were desperate to get an abortion, and Cream set himself up as an abortionist, and was then giving them what he said would be medicine that would induce a miscarriage, but it was, for the most part, it was strychnine. And then also sex workers in London when he did his final murders. But the motive, it seems to be purely hatred of women, mm-hmm. and you can see an escalation of it. And I guess maybe the origins. I mean, there's a whole pampered, narcissistic streak in him. He was from a wealthy family, lots of money to send him to the finest medical school in Canada, but trapped into an early marriage, and in fact killed his young bride. By all accounts at this distance, the evidence that was available, it seems pretty clear that he sent her tainted medicine, and mm-hmm. Perhaps that's what started it off. But the severity of what he's doing and the ruthlessness just escalates, as I said, from murder to murder.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, I've got a question from Leanne. She starts us off by asking, so there's a Canadian connection here. How did you choose? Was that why you chose to research the book, or was it just kind of incidental that he was also Canadian?
Well, I'm just going to give Scotland a little shot here, because he actually was born in the Glasgow area and came to Canada when he was 4. But yes, we have to claim him as a Canadian. I think that's probably why I knew the story. But of course, he kills in 3 countries. He kills in the United States as well, and ultimately in England. He's one of these characters I just kept bumping into when I was doing research into true crime in that period. And what fascinated me is something that was mentioned off the top, is how did he get away with so many murders in so many places? And that was really, for me, the clincher, is to understand the limitations of forensics, policing, detection, mm-hmm. the justice system that allowed him to do this.
Yeah, because, I actually was looking at the Torso murders at one point as a possibility for a book project, which I didn't end up writing. But that's another fascinating case which similar to Dr. Cream, goes over a longer period of time. We tend to focus on Jack the Ripper, but that was actually a much more contracted period, and possibly even quite a bit smaller number of victims by comparison. So it's interesting what kind of grabs the attention of what gets hidden away and disappears from the sort of register of everything. You had mentioned you were doing research on true crime, and you keep bumping into Dr. Cream, which is not somebody I'd want to bump into, and certainly not to have a drink with. But why don't you? It's important, I think, for everybody to know this isn't your only book. You do all kinds of books on true crime and other kinds of historical documents. Did you want to say a few words about what you're working on? We'll talk about what you're working on next towards the end, but some of the books leading up to this one.
Well, I started my career, I guess, in nonfiction writing as a journalist. But specifically, I covered courts. My background was history. Started getting interested in old cases. So I'm in the province of Nova Scotia in Canada, and I did some books of compilations of true crime cases here. And then I found an absolutely fascinating case, and you've got my website up here. It's going to cycle through some of the books. I found a book that is called Empire of Deception, and it's just an amazing tale of a Chicago swindler named Leo Kortz and his a Ponzi scheme that predated Charles Ponzi. He'd been running a Ponzi scheme for almost 2 decades before the famous Charles Ponzi came on the scene. And he was just amazingly good. In fact, after Ponzi was exposed in the early 20s, Leo Kortz's investors jokingly called him our Ponzi, not realizing that he was indeed a Ponzi. And my luck was that when it all went south for him in Chicago and he had to skip town ahead of being arrested, he came and hid out in Nova Scotia, not maybe an hour's drive from where I live, and then started living under a new name and continuing to spend money like water.
That's amazing. The number of times people could change their identities, which I mean, I can't even visit you in Canada without giving, signing over my firstborn. I don't have children, but if I did, signing over my firstborn, we really have it's not easy to lose your identity. It doesn't, it never happens, but it's definitely not easy. We had a couple people who joined us just a little bit late. We've got Rebecca's popped in from Indiana, and Sky's here. And we also have a couple of folks talking about what they're drinking. Not everybody went with it is quite hot. So a couple of people said it was too hot for a cream drink. Leanne's got licorice tea, and Jennifer says she's got boring old lazy red wine. Someone said they have a tonic. Oh, here we go. Yes, Susan Ballinger. She says it's too hot for creamy down here. But I think that we have a kind of it's an interesting connection for cocktails for this particular one. I think this particular book, right? We always do cocktails for our books, but when you're talking about the fact that somebody actually poisoned people with strychnine and put it in their drinks, I do think it was certainly very inventive of Kat to decide to go with a creamy drink while we were at it. A couple other, comments. I lost one. Someone was commenting on my brooch here. This was actually given to me by Lindsay Fitzharris, who's an alumni. And I saw her recently, and it's a giant sparkly squid, guys. Not kind of, sort of, but a lot, and it's big. I forget whose question it was, but okay, back to questions because we have a lot of them. Let's see. Kristen Meston says, my question is totally about the blackmail letters. Why? You would have gotten away with it if he hadn't drawn attention to them. Why did he do it?
Well, that's I was going to say the $1 million question. That was one case that he almost asked for that much money. I think a Scotland Yard detective named McNaughton had it right when he was speaking to, of all people, the trial judge at Cream's trial in London, when he said it was almost like he just needed that validation, that attention. He went out of his way to draw attention to himself. And while he convinced his a lady friend, his fiance, to write some of these letters, and she was mystified while she was writing these, and they were under assumed names, he wrote some in his own distinctive handwriting, and it ultimately led to his downfall. And what's really amazing is not only does this lead to his downfall in London, but he had been doing similar things in his early murders in Canada and the United States. And sometimes it seemed to have a motive. It seemed to be some half-baked blackmail or scheme to deflect blame. He never seemed, I could find no evidence he ever collected a dime from these. So maybe it was simply this He just needed somebody to know how clever he was.
I guess by
Yeah,
being less clever. It's interesting.
exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Are we just dumber in the United States and Canada that we were like, oh, he's pointing attention to himself, but we didn't catch him? I mean, no, he was caught
Well,
though. He did end up going to prison for a while.
yes, we can take comfort in that.
I guess, but then he gets out of talk about not learning your lesson.
Exactly. Yeah.
Stephanie Smith just wants us to know that she has a container of Nux Vomica in her living room.
Might want to keep that away from the cocktail.
I did not realize. For some reason in my head, I had not made the connection that strychnine and Nux Vomica were the same thing. As I'm a historian of medicine too, and you see the words a lot, but I hadn't really thought about it. So in this particular instance, I mean, it isn't good for you. But he was taking it too, and he wasn't killing himself, but he was also taking strychnine.
Well, again, when you go back in time and you find out this deadly poison that Agatha Christie loved and other mystery writers have loved was actually a component of medicines, because what strychnine does is it makes the nervous system go haywire, and that's the spasms and the fits and the seizures, and they call them tetanic because they're like tetanus. Yes. And they do mimic some of those symptoms. But in trace amounts, there's a benefit to this muscle stimulation, but only in trace amounts. And yes, he was taking some, but that's also one of the reasons he was able to access it. As a doctor, he could access this deadly poison, and he could legitimately access it because many doctors at that point still compounded their own medicines. Right. They learned this in medical school, so they were pharmacists, sort of amateur, not amateur, but they were pharmacists as well.
Now guys, you're going to have to help me out. I forget which book this was. I know we've read about this before, that strychnine was actually given to a runner, an Olympic runner, as what they thought it was a stimulant. I think that was a book we read for this. You guys, I read a lot of books, but that it was like caffeine or other enes. It has a stimulant property to it. Again, in trace amounts. I mean, you can break your own jaw if you have tetanus from the spasms. Do you want to give us a quick rundown of exactly what happens to you if you're poisoned with strychnine?
Well, I wanted people to understand the horror that he inflicted on his victims, because we were talking before we came on about Cream's redeeming features, which are none. Really, he's not a very nice guy. But I wanted people to understand just the gruesome death he inflicted on his victims. And poisoning. Well, poisoning is deadly, obviously, but it's kind of seen as a sneak kind of murder. It's almost like it's not sporting or something, and not maybe as cruel in some ways. But Cream, as a doctor, knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew what was going to happen. So with the kind of doses he was giving, the patients might live for hours in excruciating pain, and these spasms, muscles, basically their back contracting almost in a loop. And in between these absolutely horrifically painful attacks, periods of lucidity, of knowing another one was coming, and probably in most cases a certainty that they knew that they weren't going to recover from this. So it's hard to imagine a more horrible death. It's not like it was a quick poison and over. And a couple of his patients lingered for many, many hours in excruciating pain.
No, it's horrifying to think that you can actually pull your own muscles off your bones just by the force of the spasms. It's just awful. I also have Jennifer Pierce. She was saying motive indeed, definitely a psychopath, sociopath, but she's interested in why he didn't want to watch them die. Leanne had asked that question as well. And I am interested in that too, because part of me was thinking that if you were into death this much and you were this bad of a guy, that there'd be some kind of getting off on the actual thrill of watching it. But he doesn't seem to have participated in that.
Well, the one thing he did seem to understand is if he hung around, he might be arrested.
That's true.
It didn't seem to affect him writing about it, and he also chummed around with Scotland Yard detectives. But that's in the book.
Hey guys, how you doing?
I think that maybe is a facet of the mania, the madness of Cream, that he took some kind of delight in visualizing or knowing. And I think there's an element of almost playing God here. I mean, what could be more godlike than killing at a distance? You
Well,
know,
yeah,
and
that's
that,
true.
and he would tell some of his victims, don't take the pill now. And I mean, even then, if they did, he'd have enough time probably
Time
to
to get away.
scram. He say take it before bed when
Ugh,
he's long gone.
yeah,
So
wow.
he seems to whatever pleasure he derived, whatever sadistic pleasure he derived, seemed to be from what he could imagine. And again, since he was a trained doctor, he knew exactly what was going to happen.
It makes me wonder if he practiced on animals, since so many serial killers do, or many of them sort of start off and work that direction. I've never seen any evidence of it, but it does make you wonder a little bit.
I did see no evidence.
No, I just wanted to throw in a few things. We have a couple new folks here. Loves Dogs was saying, I thought it might be okay to participate even if I hadn't read the book because it was true. It's always okay to participate if you haven't read the book, because really, we're going to make you want to by the end of it. Yes. Sky says, sure, I already have time to, hardly ever have time to finish the books on time. We do have like 2 shows a week, and it is a lot of books. So yes, you are welcome, and do not worry at all. We hope you come, and if you haven't read the books already, you'll get enough of an interest that you'll be like, gotta add that one to my shelf. So let's see. Question from Leanne. Victorian society allowed this sequence of murders to happen. Did the Victorian values themselves encourage either the killer to murder or encourage the fact that maybe they didn't look into it that closely?
Well, both. Excellent question. And that's a theme I really wanted to develop in the book. He's contemporary of Jack the Ripper, and which was intriguing for me. He shows up in London for his final murders 3 years after Jack the Ripper. And in the press and even in the Scotland Yard files, it's pretty obvious that Scotland Yard belatedly realizes that, oh my God, there's another one. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how rare they still were, these serial killers. As bad as Jack the Ripper was, Cream really did benefit from the mores of Victorian society. The women, look, he didn't have to go stalk his victims. Yeah. They came to him.
Yeah, that's what Leanne was
saying. They came to him. They trusted him for medical help, albeit an illegal abortion. Sure. But still, they trusted him in their care. And when he said, take this medicine, they trusted him. So that was a really big factor in the fact that women, by the strict morality of the time of not being able to have a child out of wedlock, were driven into his clutches. And that is a really sad part. And then for the sex workers of Lambeth and London, his final victims, I did see evidence in the Scotland Yard files of the unreliability of these women, the stuff about their lifestyle, that they were, how do we protect these women that are putting themselves at risk? You did see
the victim and all that. Yeah,
you did see elements of that. Not as blatantly as you might have thought, but it was pretty clear that. Well, certainly when Cream does stand trial, no lesser figure than the trial judge is certainly quite upset to realize that Scotland Yard seems to have been less vigilant because the victims were sex workers, the early victims, and perhaps that allowed Cream to continue to kill.
Well, it might also explain, at least in some measure, why he went after those victims. I mean, it could be... Obviously, he seemed to have a hatred of women, but even if not, they're safer to go after. I think that's they were more vulnerable, but they weren't just more vulnerable because women are more vulnerable. They were more vulnerable because society left them so vulnerable, and I think that's really interesting. Kristen Meston had another question about concerning Jack the Ripper. If it's so easily proved that he wasn't Jack the Ripper, since he was in prison in Chicago at the time, why do people still keep him on the list as maybe being Jack the Ripper? Do we need more reason to dislike him?
Well, yeah, maybe that's it. He's such a likable character. We have to make him Jack the Ripper. Well, look, your guess is as good as mine. Why he's still on that list, and I make it clear in the book that there's absolutely no evidence that he either was Jack the Ripper or could have been Jack the Ripper. Right. And yes, he was. There have been some theories that, well, because it's only because of the similarity of the victims or some of them anyway, and a downtrodden neighborhood of London, albeit a different one, that maybe he could be this. It could be Jack the Ripper reprised. Well, Jack the Ripper used knives. Cream used poison. That's quite a difference.
It's a big deal.
Cream was a doctor. Was Jack the Ripper a doctor? Some people say he was. But the biggest impediment is he was in prison in Illinois in 1888. But believe it or not, there are theories that that's not an ironclad alibi, that perhaps he paid someone to serve his sentence so he could escape to London. What he did in the intervening years, I don't know. No, I mean, it's preposterous, really. And I was able to trace the origin of this whole idea that he somehow confessed on the gallows. And it's not a contemporary thing of his case. It's a later clear invention. A decade later, just a little item in the press suggesting that he'd made some kind of Cream had confessed to being Jack the Ripper. And then it took on a life of its own over the intervening time, and that's why he showed up on the list.
I think that's great. I love that detail. I got to chime in. I love that detail in the book, because what a way to go out. Like, you've perplexed people your whole life, and then just to leave them with a cliffhanger, at the gallows.
Except he didn't. Except I would argue he didn't do it. But that he was supposed to have said, just as a trapdoor was sprung, he was.
Which actually,
said,
as much as he loved to draw attention to himself, I wouldn't be like, I don't think it's him. But at the same time, couldn't you just see him being like, you know what I'm gonna do? One last killer.
Yeah, if only we could all leave an urban legend behind when we go, right? That's the legacy.
And I think that's why it's so durable. And it's this business that he would have said, that his last words purported to be, I am Jack the... And then the trap was sprung and he was caught in mid-sentence.
I'm a jack of all trades. Oh.
if it happened, and I argue pervasively it never happened, but if it did, Brandy, I mean, it could simply mean that in this bizarre mind of his, that he wanted one last shot at glory, and what would be more glorious. But the problem is, nobody at the hanging said a word about this at the time.
You think it would be a bit of a bombshell?
I think exactly. I think everybody would have said, hey, wait a minute, we may have solved another crime here, and that didn't happen.
It's really, so again, to go back to the book I did not write, I know it's awful to refer to books you haven't written, right? But it was fascinating to me. That was another, a person who dissected their victims, and they found them piecemeal, and they had to put them back together and figure out which women's body parts went where and all that. And a lot of people suggested, oh, it's Jack the Ripper. And even the forensic people at the time were like, so no, we have forensic evidence. These are really different crimes. But everyone wanted it to be Jack the Ripper, because then it meant there was just one psychotic killer that you had to worry about. I think it was much more troubling to people to think there were a bunch of people who might be murdering people. And it was much easier in some weird way to say, at least it's all one crazy guy, and I don't have to worry about, the rest of the people around me, or I don't have to think that there's more than one threat coming. I just wanted to say a quick word about the difficulties of being a researcher of history, because you just mentioned, like, you're having to kind of go like, all right, where did this come from? I'm doing the lady pause things, guys. Where did this come from? Is it real? Is it true? And kudos, because I've been in your shoes, not for true crime, but for other things. It is so difficult to sort of unpack, especially when there's headlines involved. You must find that very difficult.
Well, I know Eric Larson's talked about this, other nonfiction writers, is it's really important to not get too bogged down into the layers and layers of secondary sources, what's been said about them. It's interesting, and I think you want to dissect that to see where where some of the mythology has come from. But I want to go back to the original documents, and even though there'd been quite a bit written on Cream, not book-wise, and surprisingly, a lot of it's been fictionalized. Even though I think it's an incredible true story, obviously. But I wanted to go back to the original documents, and I found a lot of court files that no one had looked at, which surprised me. But that's sort of part of my practice is to go back to what was known at the time, not the stuff that's been added in. And I still see things on the internet, newer articles about Cream, and they say that he killed 2 women in Edinburgh. Well, I know exactly where that came from. That's an invention, probably from the 1950s or 60s, some feature that was done, and no evidence of it. No evidence at the time, and no evidence anywhere.
Right.
And one of the advantages, of course, I had was the Scotland Yard file, which was so well done. And Scotland Yard sent a detective to America to learn all about Cream's earlier crime.
Okay, that's interesting.
And that helped me for storytelling, because then I have this Inspector Jarvis of the Yard basically following Cream's footsteps as I'm recreating what had happened the decade and a half before.
That's so cool. I mean, it's to find a source like that is so meaningful. Davey, you might have to help me. I just noticed that my comment thread wasn't updating, and now it is. And wow, there's a lot. Okay, so
there's
I'm going
a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot.
There's a whole conversation going on about
I'm going to keep my mouth shut here and try to try to get these over here. There's a lot of discussion about how he used his credentials to get strychnine, and the fact that he had credentials in the first place. He actually was a doctor who had credentials. And now I've lost my place a little bit here, but I also really love Amanda's comment that comparing Cream to Mutter shows that not all ostentatious dressers are the same. So true. And then talking about the acid bath murderer did the same. He told the police it was him, but he thought the police would never prove it. So there's a sense that policing was still in it, that certain forensic things were still in their infancy. And as much as we might talk about, Sherlock Holmes was a fiction, and the reality was much more difficult. Things were very difficult to prove. So I've lost track. Davey, if you can hunt up, I've missed a couple of questions that I know had to do with that. I also see someone's asking about a funny story you've told.
Oh, yes.
About how easy was it to locate quarter records in Boone County? Seemingly difficult task if they were stored in the basement.
Well, just to tell a quick story. This is the murder that Cream actually is convicted of in Illinois and spends 10 years in prison before he gets out and goes to London for his finale, I guess, for want of a better word. And I knew there would be again, since I was a court reporter and covering the courts, I know that even at this distance, it's not uncommon for really old court records to still be in the original courthouse. And it took me quite a few phone calls to connect with. They kept saying, well, you have to talk to this clerk, and she's only in twice a week. So I have my spiel. How am I going to say it's this case, 1881 Cream? And she says, oh, yeah, I've got that on my desk. Because she was actually writing a little history of the courthouse. So that was a really lucky find, and that's the story.
That's awesome. No, you know what? I used to work in a medical museum, and I think it's best if we just imagine that everything's housed in a way that makes sense. But it's not. Davey, I think you've even looked behind a couple of the panels in there a couple of times.
Oh yeah.
I've taken you.
Behind the scenes of museums are a mess. I think Anthro Girl's comment here sparked a lot of conversation about obsession with true crime, and the focus is mostly on the criminals and not the victims. And this kind of sparked a long conversation in the chat thread.
Right. Because Chloe was saying that, for instance, I was going to pop up Chloe's there, that the legend of a person whose identity we can't confirm, like the Ripper, but then don't seem to care about the women. There is a book called The Five, which came out mid-pandemic, and it does focus on the women, and interestingly enough was not a particularly good seller, and I feel like that says a lot about the kind of culture in which we tend to live.
I wouldn't mind jumping in on that, because one of the things I wanted to do was to restore some dignity to his victims, to make them people as best I could. Because, I'm reading some of the secondary, some of the more recent work done, and the names are wrong. Some of them aren't even named. Right. And I thought, well, let's at least get their names right. Let's at least find out who they were. And they weren't all sex workers, and they weren't all, a lot of them were struggling young women who, as I said, came to Cream in desperation. And so I really wanted to do that. And when you read the book, you'll see that every victim leads off a chapter with their name, because again, I didn't want people, and it's easy in this case. I mean, 10 murders, it's a statistic, and I didn't want it to be a statistic. So I did. So it's an important question, and again, I didn't want to look so much. I had to recreate Cream's murders because I wanted you to hate him. I wanted you to really hate him because he's such a fiend. But my focus always was the hunt. How did he get away with it? And what does that say about Victorian society and the status of a professional doctor? Because he often cashed in on that when he was a suspect. Because many of these women were known to be his patients. The early years. Yeah.
But, and doctors were thought of as being above suspicion so much of the time. Kat asks that he's been called a smart sadist, a man hungry for money, an attention seeker, and someone obsessed with sex. What do you think? And I know it's always hard to guess, but if he lived today, what do you think we would have discovered about his mental health?
Well, it's not a pretty picture you've painted there, and I think you've nailed him. I mean, this is a time before, even the word serial killer would be almost a century before we'd have the word serial killer as we know it today. And it was interesting to read in the press. The British Medical Journal was one that covered this in detail, thinking about what does this say medically or in terms of psychology. And when you read the book, you'll find out that one interesting thing is, will Cream plead insanity? Because there's so much madness here. I would argue there's so much method. He's so careful. He's careless in some ways, but he's so methodical in others, sourcing the strychnine, getting better and better at finding better ways of getting his victims to take it that mitigate against that. But at his trial, the prosecution actually had 4 alienists or psychologists, psychiatrists in the audience taking copious notes. Unfortunately, those notes didn't survive that I could find. They're not in the files, but they were all ready to counter any kind of insanity defense that might come. I think he'd be seen as a psychopath, obviously sociopath, psychopath, and
because he just had no seeming remorse, not even after certain time.
No, none at all. No remorse. Just absolute. Evil incarnate. Really. I mean, he's as close as you're going to get, I think.
Yeah. Susan Ballinger pointed out, we talk about how rare serial killers were, but then again, it's hard to know how rare they were. Lower class women tended not. Well, they underreported as well. One of the things that I discovered in a lot of my research, if you were a young single woman and you were walking home, so you worked at a factory, it's after dark, they just assumed you were a prostitute. When the Contagious Disease Acts were passed, police were just arresting women. They were like, well, you're on the street, you're by yourself, you must be a prostitute, so we'll arrest you. Of course, if you were arrested and you couldn't go to your job, you lost your job. If you were pregnant and you had to take time off, you lost your job. So, the concept that there was no place to go. If you were a young woman, even if you were a married young woman, if the two of you couldn't afford to live without a second income, you would probably seek an abortion because you'd lose your job. There's no paid maternity leave or anything. So they underreported. They're certainly, if they survive it, they may not report it because they were seeking an abortion, right? There's all these different kinds of things that work against them. And then Rebecca Gibson was saying, we're probably going to see upticks in victimization with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So your book is really, in many ways, I think, very present suddenly in ways that you might not have anticipated when you were writing it.
Yeah. No, that's true. The fact that abortion was underground, illegal, that some doctors felt pressured to help women who were really insistent. And I quote a contemporary observer at the time saying that, the idea of a woman having a child out of wedlock was a living death. I mean, that's how strict it was.
Yeah.
And this book shows that the restrictions opened women to vulnerability, and that, no doubt in my mind. I mean, I say it again that, Cream wasn't out there stalking young women. They were coming to him because they thought they could trust him to their peril.
Which makes it, I think, so much worse. I mean, not that Jack the Ripper is better, but there is a sense in which being betrayed by someone you trust seems so much worse than otherwise. Kristen was saying, wasn't forensic science just in its sort of early stages at the time? There seemed to be a lot of controversy over the doctors who did testify, and that seemed to work in his favor. Did you want to? I mean, I know forensic. I've studied the history of forensics too, and the fact that even blood tests were quite. I mean, that came along quite late. I published a piece in Crime Reads about it. And then it wasn't even picked up readily. So even once we had some of the forensic things, people were like, that's interesting, and went on without it.
One of the challenges I faced was 3 different locations. Small town Canada, which had one set of no detectives, a coroner trying his best to get to the bottom of a murder that Cream was involved in. Chicago, where the police were known to be corrupt and inept, and problems there. And then in London, where the top toxicologist in England, Thomas Stevenson, he was involved in this case, and he confirmed the presence of strychnine by tasting fluid taken from the cadavers of the victims, and that was considered cutting edge because his parlor trick was that he could identify up to 50 poisons by putting a sample on his tongue and experiencing the burning sensation. One of them was strychnine.
Neat trick. I'm with Rebecca.
Yeah, right.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I have normally we break right about now for a musical guest. We don't have a musical guest, and that's good because it's going to take me forever to get through all these questions. Oh, Kathleen, by the way, she also, like me, was like, no research. No, we need that. It's not right. But then I just was looking over another one here. Did anyone here list? Shocked at his brother constantly standing up for him when he would have been one of the only people in position to know all of the allegations about him from before. I mean, that's interesting.
There was also that continued, and they asked about the dad too. The dad always standing up for him and giving him money.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, I hope when you read the book, you'll see there's some nuance here. They're talking about his father, William Cream, was a rich timber merchant in Quebec City, Canada, and his brother Daniel, who took over the firm, and where Thomas Neal Cream was sent to medical school to become a doctor. Daniel, I think it's important to point out that his family didn't know what you know when you read the book. Mm-hmm. Some of them, they weren't even sure he'd been married. They never met his bride. Oh. They didn't know why she died, and he was never charged in that case. They don't seem to have known about the mess he got into in London, Ontario, Canada. And his father did support him and did hire a lawyer for a trial in Chicago, but that was another murder. In that case, Cream was acquitted at trial. And you mentioned about his status as a doctor. His whole defense was, no. And in this case, it wasn't poison. It was a different case. He had botched an operation, an abortion. And it was like, no, he's too highly skilled a doctor to have done this. And the jury bought it. But his father cut him off essentially after he went to prison in the 1880s, cut him out of his will. There was still money provided by the estate, but one of his father's friends made it clear that the whole stress of this, his father was extremely pious, upstanding Presbyterian, probably hastened his death. The stigma and the strain of this on the family.
And it does seem interesting to me that, and I'm listening to the audiobook. I tend to listen to a lot of audiobooks. And so I'm listening to the audiobook and I'm in my basement, which is a nice, creepy place to read about murder. It's interesting to me how there's no way that as his crimes compound, I find that like even his name, like just Cream. Like he just weeps awfulness, but at the same time, he got married. He convinced someone to marry him, or he was forced into it, whatever. But he did, there were people who clearly supported him. His brother supported him. He gave his own wife an abortion. It's very unclear. It's difficult to see exactly what the situations were around that. So Susan Cotter asked, do you think he just took advantage of I just like murder, I'm a psychopath, these people are here and they're vulnerable? Or was he trying to punish? Was he actually I hate them and I want them to die? Because I've seen that in other serial killers, but I feel like there's just this, I think that's part of the mystery that seems to be the exact hatred or wording is still kind of missing.
Well, one of the difficulties I had with Cream is there seem to be multiple things going on, and every murder's similar but different. And as I said, there's an escalation, and certainly his lawyer in Chicago, they were talking about prostitution. Now, at this point, none of his victims had been prostitutes. They'd all been mostly been women seeking abortions. Mm-hmm. And he said, that all these women should be killed, which would be startling, you'd think, but the lawyer sent him on his way. And then when he was in London, someone he befriended, a drinking buddy, said that he talked about the women of Lambeth as cattle who should be killed. So, there was this escalation along the way. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, looking at it, I wonder if maybe being trapped into that marriage where he performed the abortion, they still forced him to marry Flora Eliza Brooks, who was his wife, because the day after the wedding, he said, I'm out of here, I'm going to London, England to further my education, and she never saw him again. And but it was discovered that he was sending her medicine, and there was no investigation at the time. But a decade later, when there was reason to follow up and find out what Cream had been up to, her family doctor said, he really believed that Cream had slipped her poison, and that was a totally unpunished crime. Unfortunately, he could have been stopped then. Should have been.
It's very interesting to me that I just put it up there a second ago. The blind trust in doctors, right? We do. It's like people are I play a doctor on TV, right? We even trust TV doctors. We trust pretend doctors in commercials. There's a sense in which we have put medicine on such a pedestal. And I attack this in a lot of different angles, right? Because I'm in a medical humanities journal where we use the humanities to look critically at medicine. But in this country, there's even now, today, yesterday, last week, we still have this sense that somehow doctors are above. And it started a long time ago. It's still going on. Generally speaking, we don't blame the doctors. We think the doctors have our best interest in mind. I do think there's more questioning now than there used to be. Davey, would you agree? I feel like, but there's still this sense that, of course, you'll trust them. Anther Girl says, people trust me and I only work in the doctor's office.
Well, and I mean, Cream is an outlier here. I mean, it's not like McGill Medical School in Montreal was producing serial killers.
I mean, they're everywhere.
And I did think it was important to resist the idea that somehow he'd been turned into this murderous monster at medical school. But I did. You mentioned The Butchering Art, Lindsay Fitzharris's book about Lister and the butchering art being surgery in Victorian times. And Cream experienced that. No anesthetic, no sterilization.
Germ theory.
And one interesting, I mean, he did dissections, but they never operated on the internal organs they never learned how to operate on them because no one would ever survive that surgery at that time. So they didn't do that. So, it was really telling details like that. But, there was a lot of talk about some of the students, fellow students who went through McGill and went through that training, that it did change people because it was really such a bloody, brutal business.
Yeah.
And maybe that was a little bit of a factor. You already had this damaged individual with potential to go where he went. But what the medical school did was give him all the skill he needed and all the knowledge he needed to go out there and kill.
There's a lot of talk about the torso murderer in England being probably medically trained, because they said he's either that or a butcher, because nobody takes apart a person in so efficient a manner. So Amanda points out something interesting. On the other hand, so on one hand, we have people with blind faith in doctors. On the other hand, there's people who don't trust medicine or vaccines or whatever, and we have quackery. We actually had Lydia Kang on talking about quackery. I think that's where that strychnine anecdote came from. So it is interesting. We have too much trust in some ways, not enough trust in others.
Yeah. No, and that's fair. And again, we're going back over a century to where, but a professional like Cream he was afforded not just by his patients going to him. I could see it in the records. The police dismissing him. He's walking around London with a samples case of medicine that he got from the States and took with him over there, including a vial of strychnine. And two of the Scotland Yard investigators into the murders in Lambeth still don't think he's a possible suspect because he's a doctor. Yeah. Well, no, he seems to be a guy who sells. He says he sells. This is a samples case because he's a wholesaler in medicine components to doctors.
Well, and he was. He's quite good at lying. I mean, he doesn't strike me as a particular. So one of the things you learn about H.H. Holmes or this Devil in the White City is a lot of times these serial killers are also quite charming. He does not strike me as a particularly charming individual. So. At least from your notes, it doesn't seem like he should have been able to like swan in and charm people out of things, and yet he does escape the noose of justice repeatedly. It's very interesting.
Well, that's a really good point, because charm is not his strong suit. I mean, one of the things he's doing in London when he meets a new guy at a restaurant and pulls out pornographic images to show him. He's got these great. I mean, not exactly like, I
thought I was socially awkward, but I've never pulled out pornography at a dinner table discussion.
And he's taking too much morphine, and he's a very unlikable guy. And any sort of space he's afforded or credibility he's given really is tied with this fact that he has this professional status. Right. And early in his career, I mean, he was actually certified. He got his license from the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Edinburgh, Scotland. He sat the tests, and that was the gold standard. And he put that in his ads when he moved to a new town to attract patients. He pulled out that certificate at a trial and was acquitted. I mean, he had sterling credentials for the time, and he used them.
Yeah, it's crazy. Oops. Oh no, you guys type really fast. Anthro Girl had just said something about she thought she'd heard this some of this stuff from another serial killer, and it makes you wonder how similar a lot of them are with each other. There it is. Yeah, and then also Susan Cotter said it does make you really appreciate the regulation of our drugs, right? Because no, we just did kill shot last time, so sometimes that regulation has loopholes.
I was just thinking about it. They take a Hippocratic oath. We send them to all this, years of training in school. You don't trust your mechanic because they didn't take a Hippocratic oath, right? You judge everything they tell you about your car, but you don't judge the doctor.
Right. Maybe they should take a Hippocratic oath of the car. Speaking of cars, you guys might really enjoy the skit that's coming up for next time. But we are starting to run loose on time, or loose. We're running loose. We're running short on time.
It's a loose show tonight. It's loose.
It is a loose show. There's a lot of murder involved. There was a creamy cocktail. So it is time, Peculiars, for the Davey quiz. Stump the author. But don't worry, Dean. You can ask the Peculiars for help in finding the answers. So I'm going to take myself out of the feed temporarily. I've got some winners to give and some updates to give afterwards, but I'm going to
Brandy does a very good job of throwing their answers in, so they'll be there to help you out. But
Good.
we've talked about the, Cream. We've talked about the victims. The one character we haven't gotten into, and I'm glad we're saving this for the end, is Scotland Yard. So the quiz this week is called On the Case of Scotland Yard, and those are out of order right there. I hope you didn't see the answer. Uh-oh, I lost my first question. All right, we'll jump to question 2 while I load up the first question. But these are questions about Scotland Yard. I did a little bit of research and the history of them. So the first question for you, they may not have been the first to use this investigation technique, but they did help popularize it in the world. Was it A, fingerprinting, B, good cop, bad cop, or C, confidential informants? What do you think Scotland Yard made popular in the world?
Do I get to phone a friend? No, just kidding. I believe it was fingerprints.
Yeah, Peculiars, you got to chime in here. Help them out here.
They're saying fingerprints. I think they're right.
And I'm going to stall while I reload question number 1. There it is. And the answer was yes, fingerprinting. I guess they'd been using it in India as far back as the 1800s. There was something about a billiard ball theft that was like the first case where they used fingerprinting. I don't know, someone stealing billiard balls out of the billiard hall. I'm not sure exactly how that works.
Well, the one that strikes me is it was early in the 20th century, and Scotland Yard was known as the first murder case, where a bloody fingerprint was found on a windowsill and was used. Yeah.
All right. I'm not sure if you saw the answer or not, but quiz question number 1. London didn't have a formal police force until 1829, but instead of taking the name London Police Department, they got their unique moniker from A, the chief inspector's dog. Was it a Scottish terrier? B, an adjacent courtyard, a literal yard, or C, from their Scottish bagpipe corps that they were famous for. Where do you think the name Scotland Yard comes from?
I feel like I might know the answer to this one, but I'm waiting to see what the Peculiars have to say.
Well, I should I give it away, because I think I know this, but
just Brandy did pop in like Kilroy. Yes.
I don't think so.
He's saying not C. What else do you think, Peculiars?
I think that might be right.
B. Is Kristen right?
I think Kristen's got it. Yeah.
The answer is yes. An adjacent courtyard. The answer is B. Apparently, it was the site of a former medieval castle where Scottish royalty stayed, and then all was left was this courtyard.
And I bet you there were bagpipes played, just saying, and someone probably had a Scottish.
I thought it'd be fun if it was the chief inspector's dog. I thought that would have been fun. All right, quiz question number 3 about Scotland Yard. Scotland Yard's headquarters now, their modern headquarters, has a few secrets, including this secret room that houses the blank. Is it the officer-only speakeasy, just like the Raven Master has in his Tower of London? Is it the recording studio, for the officers to unwind? Or is it C, the crime museum? What do you think it is?
I think it's C, because it used to be known as the Black Museum in Cream's time, and it was this bizarre, this macabre collection of seized weapons, some still with blood crusted on them, and they used it as a training tool. They would take recruits down, and they were supposed to sort of get a sense of the criminal mind from some of these leftover exhibits from trials. At least I hope I'm right with that long
You are right. It is the crime museum.
Are you right?
Someone did say B in the chat, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that there's a garage band of Scotland Yard detectives, I'm sure, somewhere. The crime museum was interesting, and it's private. It's still private. You have to get a special invitation. You don't just get to visit it.
Kristen Meston, she was 3 for 3 this time, so well done there. I wish it was B.
My research in London actually predated the formal establishment of the museum, but it was open on invitation. And unfortunately, the 2 times I was in London doing my research, the fellow who ran it was not there.
Oh,
because they have Cream's. They still have Cream's sample case with the vials of poison and medicine in it.
That's very interesting.
So I really wanted to see that.
Sorry. I honestly think that's why doctors' museums existed, though, a little bit. I think it's sort of like, see this? You're going to put this right up someone's. Like, I think that sometimes that was kind of a similar sort of.
Yeah, you should come see
breaking ground.
Brandy's old museum in Cleveland.
My old museum.
It's a sight. There's some things in there.
I think there might still be videos out there of me giving weird tours to. We had a lot of forceps. My favorite part was in telling teenage boys where those went and what they were for. Yeah, I caused one of them to pass out once.
I do. Speaking of being a great conversationalist, I do have to slip a question in here because you mentioned the man he ate dinner with, and it seemed like he actually formed a friendship with that person. Like they continued to eat multiple meals together. That was a thing that carried on. And there was the guy on the boat that was stuck with him as like a drinking partner. So I wanted to ask you sort of about the psychology of that. Like, was that just a thing in Victorian times that if someone showed up at your dinner table, you were stuck with them? Or why would this person continue to spend time with Cream and talk with Cream when he was clearly perturbed by him?
Well, first of all, as a researcher, I love having these eyewitnesses. So I guess I didn't want to fault them. Like, and I'm hanging around with Cream a little too much myself, even though it's at a distance in my time. But it's a good point. And in one of the Canadian murders, there's a fellow that knew him really well, and obviously multiple encounters with him. It wasn't his charming personality necessarily. You mentioned the fellow on the steamer who had the misfortune of having the stateroom across from Cream, and Cream would crash in every night with a bottle and force him to stay up. And this guy was genuinely terrified of him, and thought, I better pretend that I like this because he was so uncomfortable. So there were some people that I think it wasn't necessarily voluntary, but I'm grateful for their insights.
And you thought your freshman college roommate was rough.
Well, yes, exactly. Yeah.
Just imagine though, I was someone's freshman college roommate. Think about that. Actually, I was once on a cruise, and they do assign you dinner partners, and you're not allowed to change tables.
Yes.
And I almost swam home. It would have been a long trip.
I've been lucky. I've only had good experiences with that so far. So
I really hate cruises. A friend of mine was getting married on the cruise. I do not like boats because there's water under them. I like water when I'm on land. Like, look, water. Lovely. I like water when I'm underwater, so I can scuba dive. Something about the boats really bothers me. It's like being on top of the water is weird. I don't get it. Being on top of the water with unfriendly people is even worse.
Amanda asked, isn't one of those guys that he tried to befriend one of the ones he tried to pin a murder on then? Did he follow up and blackmail that person?
No. Cream fired high when he picked his blackmail victims. One was an MP who owned the W.H. Smith bookstore empire. One was the physician to the royal family, and another was an earl who was divorcing his actress wife. And in each case, he accused them of a murder. He posed at various different names, sometimes as a private detective.
Oh my gosh!
But he didn't. No, he didn't. He didn't pick on this fellow. But this dining companion came forward to one of the London newspapers later, and just gave a long interview about this sort of encounter. And of course, as creepy as he was, he may not have enjoyed his company, but nobody knew they were sitting with one of the, premier serial killers of all time.
Fair. That's a later thing that you kind of discover. I can see how that could be interesting conversation for the rest of your life. But think about it, guys. Maybe we've had dinner with serial killers and we don't know yet. I've been on a lot of airplanes. I'm just saying, I was on that cruise. I wouldn't be at all surprised if one of the people I was stuck eating with was a serial killer. I'd be like, yeah, I see that. So we are running towards the end of our show. You guys, for last questions, last comments, please get those in there. While we're doing that, I'm going to give a couple of announcements. It has been an amazing time. It has been amazing. But I will say that's why I stay home. This is really funny, you guys. Their response to my point about eating with serial killers. What? No one's interested in that? You're not writing a book about it, I guess. Sorry. Anyway, I do have some announcements. One of them, David's queued up. So this is our last show of season 2. This is also, as of last week, Thursday, I think, was our year anniversary. We've been doing the Peculiar Book Club for 1 year, 2 seasons, full seasons, busy seasons, and we're getting ready to step into season 3. Season 3, we're doing a few new things. One is a t-shirt that is specific to the season that you can purchase from me. And many of you took the survey to see what you wanted us to put on there. I asked if you guys wanted it to be murdery or squiddy, and you guys were like, how about cephalopods and murder? So that's what we ended up with, and we've put it there with, it's got some shaker and a martini and a knife and a poison book and lots of things. I did design the octopus. On the back of the t-shirt, there are all the authors and other people that will appear on the show in this time. So you guys can, in fact, get this t-shirt and it can come to you and you can have it. You'll just have to contact me, and I'll be sending a note out with the newsletter with that pretty soon. Got a lot of people saying cheers, woo, happy anniversary for us. Leanne was saying she's hoping you had a good time, Dean. We hope you'll come back. We actually love having authors a second time. Once you've been an alumni, you can never really escape us.
Okay.
Yeah, it's true, but it's in a good way.
No, I'd love to. And no, this has been great. Well, I'm always finding bizarre characters, and my next character is a gentleman jewel thief from 1920s New York. I call it Catch Me If You Can meets the Great Gatsby. So it's quite a tale.
My heart. There's this is an actual Victorian top hat, but my second favorite hat that I wear all the time is my 1920s little fedora. So yes, this is right up my street. I feel like you could come back, and this time, just so you know, our peculiars actually turn up in person sometimes with our banner when our alumni authors appear other places. So we will keep track of you. If we see several people here. Susan saying, "Oh yeah, 1920s New York is my thing." Jewel Thief book. Lots of excitement here. Gentlemen Thieves. Also, bizarreness is always good. So you're definitely among friends here, Dean, I think.
Well, that's great. That's great. Yeah.
My last is I now do a hat pick where I pick people's names out of a hat to receive swag. The swag isn't here yet. I'm still waiting for it to arrive because apparently everything is back ordered. But the names I picked today is Sadie Simmons and Paige Turner. Sadie Simmons and Paige Turner. You guys send me an email and I will get your addresses for when at some point the new t-shirts are not the season 3 t-shirts, but the other ones, which I forgot to send Davey a picture of, but it's the one with the Nautilus. So it says Peculiar Book and then has a bloody club. So it's Peculiar Book Club. Just for you. So please check in with me. Yes, good job. I see we get some congrats. Sadie Simmons has heard it. Yay! Chloe wants us to do a day where we can do a UK event with a banner. It's coming, Chloe. It's coming. I feel like at some point in the future, I'm going to steal Davey and we're going to take this on the road somewhere.
Brandy was on your continent recently. Just not.
I was. Yeah, that's true. Future swag. Guest page. You got it. Field trip, says Leanne. I agree. I actually will be. I will be in the UK in August, I think, and again in December. So now that travel has loosened up, I spend a lot of my time over there. I was in Berlin earlier this year for research, but how about Canada, eh? Says Kathleen. I was in Toronto, a couple weeks ago, but I missed you. It has been a marvelous time. Dean, I feel like we could talk for hours about this. What a fascinatingly weird guy Cream really was, and how wonderfully you brought him to life, but at the same time without making us like him, which is that's, I liked the book and hated the guy, and I'm astonished that you were able to pull that off. It was really good. And I know everyone else enjoyed it too. And it's just been wonderful. Any last thoughts you'd like to leave us with? For instance, when that 1920s book might be coming out?
Well, thanks. Look, this has been great. I really enjoyed it. I think I held my own in the quiz, which I was really worried about. I'm looking forward to and I'm hanging out now as I'm writing with this jewel thief Arthur Berry, and he's he's a much more likable character, and
Okay, got it.
I've had my fill of Dr. Cream. But anyway, there's information on there's a write up on my website if people want to check it out. I'm
Cool.
hoping to have it wrapped up 2023, so maybe another year and a half, 2 years. But this has been great. Look, thank you very much. I appreciate all the questions and the general fun and mayhem we've had tonight.
Yes, mayhem. We're very good at mayhem here. It's a thing that we do quite well. Anna Lopez says thank you, and thanks all the Peculiars for another great conversation. And thank you to you, our viewers, our listeners, for being here for our last 2 seasons, for getting ready to start the next season at a place where, if you're weird, you're family.
You got the blue bottle blues when you wake up in the night. Don't make a big mistake, 'cause you can never make it right. When you reach out for the vial, feel the ridges in the glass. It's a matter of survival, baby, better watch your back. There is no antidote. There is